Okay, it has been at least a full day, even a couple of days in some cases, since I threw the pots that were part of this video program that I'm doing for you here. And today is the day that I'm going to be doing some trimming and decorating of the pots. The pots have been drying out nicely, and they're at the point of being what we call leather hard right now. And leather hard means that it is still soft enough that it can be carved into, that it can be trimmed and so on and so forth, but it's stiff enough that it doesn't sort of can collapse when you try and put pressure on it. One of the things that I'm doing here, and I wanted to illustrate this before I put it aside, when I put handles on mugs, there are a couple of different types of handles that I put on. This is what is called a pulled handle, where a piece of clay is put on the side, and then I kind of pull the handle so that it sort of is hanging out. I've got coffee in here now, so I don't want to tip it sideways, but I will show you later how a pulled handle is created. Now there's another way to make handles for mugs, which I've done in the past, especially when I've done sort of very large scale fundraisers for different organizations, including the NSS and the Maine Children's Cancer Program and various other things. So this is what I call an extruded handle right here. Now this is of course much wider, or excuse me, much longer than I would need for just doing one or maybe even two handles out of this. But I just wanted to show you that this was, I put a piece of clay inside of an extruder that has a long handle on it that you pull down. And then in the bottom is a plate that has three small holes that are cut or sort of drilled into the base, so that what happens is you get three sort of, I don't know if you can see that hopefully, but there are sort of three holes that it gets extruded through, and it kind of does three humps like that. And what I'm going to do now is I have a wire cutter that I know is the right length for doing mugs. So I'm going to go ahead and use this thing. You can see that there's wires that go across there that I use that just sort of cut into it. So I'm just going to, I only really need to do one mug, but this is how I would do multiple ones. So I cut through it all the way like this, push the wires down to make sure that they are thoroughly cut through the clay, and then I very quickly yank the wire out. You can see that they flopped around a little bit, but that's not really a problem. And then I'm going to grab a special device here. I made this, or had someone make this for me when I did the Maine Children's Cancer Program fundraiser, where I threw 1,000 coffee mugs in 24 hours. Boy, did my arms hurt after that. But basically what we do is, after extruding these pieces out, I kind of drape it over this nice dowel system here. And back then the mugs were pretty primitive to throw 1,000 of them in 24 hours, but we wound up raising about $12,000 for the Maine Children's Cancer Program, which was great. I'm not going to worry about the rest of these here, but this is just sort of the way that I would normally do this. So I'm going to put these aside for now, and I'm just going to let them sit here to sort of stiffen up just a little bit. And I'll start doing some trimming now. I'm going to bring over these various pots here. These are ones that I threw. When I first started doing these videos, this is one of the first pots that I threw here, but the problem was I didn't realize that there was a 20-minute limit on the video taping of it, so people didn't get to see the latter part of it, because I spent about maybe 25 minutes or so in throwing this and designing this, but I'll explain this a little bit more. And I'm going to put the other pieces over here slightly out of the way so that they don't interfere with the video that I'm doing right now. Yeah, we'll take couple of pieces away. We'll start on this one right here. So I threw several coffee mugs to illustrate different types of techniques that you can use to create some decorative things on the piece while you are throwing it. There's a lot of decoration that goes on when the pot is leather hard, such as it is now. And you can see here, I can practically throw this around and it doesn't distort the shape, but it's still soft enough that I can cut into the bottom of it here. Now, I don't mind doing that because I'm going to be trimming some of this away. But trimming gets rid of some of the excess weight down in the bottom in some cases. Now I've already got this decorative technique that was engraved into it while I was throwing the piece, so I'm not going to do any more decorative things there, but I am going to put a handle on this one. So what I've done is I've kind of wet down the surface here just to make it damp, and you'll notice that I just ran my finger around the top here to make the rim a little bit on the wet side. Now, what you need to do, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky. For me, it's fairly easy because I've been throwing pots for 49 years now. But what a lot of people wind up having to do is they put it on there, and then they sort of look at it as it's going around, and then they push it in the direction that they think that it should be, and then try and see if that's centered, still a little bit off, and then you can make little marks on there. I haven't done this in so long that I sort of have forgotten how to do it. So then, once the pot is centered on there, then the usual thing for people to do is to take a little bit of soft clay, which I'll have to dig up. A little bit of soft clay. Just going to roll it around a little bit, and I'm going to turn it into sort of 3 little bits of clay on each side. Kind of roll it around a little bit and make sure that it's kind of dry there on the bottom. And you can put one there. You're going to do it in 3 sort of opposing sides to hold it in place. Next one over here. And then the third one sort of opposite the 2 of them. These little pads of clay in there will hold it in place, which is fine. Okay. That's still just a little bit off, but we'll just leave it at that for now. So then I'm going to show you, afterwards, I'm going to show you a different technique that I use that works really, really well for me. And I learned how to do this. Sometimes it's difficult for people to understand how you tap center them and all, but I'll show you when the time comes. So there's some extra clay down here in the bottom. I want to cut away some of the stuff here on the side and a little bit up on the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the top, and I'm holding my finger down on the piece too to sort of counteract the the carving into it. Sometimes if you have a strong carving on the outer edge, it has a tendency to pull it that way. So by putting my hand on the other side, it will sort of balance it out a little bit. And I tap it every now and then to listen to it. Right now it still sounds thick enough that I know that I can still cut away some more of the clay. So I'll go back again in the middle and kind of move. Whoops, there we go. See how that pot just sort of started to pop off of there. This is probably just as good a time to show you how I would do the trimming on here. I'm going to remove these pads. Now, there's nothing wrong with using these pads, and for beginners I highly recommend it because there's a lot of reasons why the method that I use is sort of an advanced method. Now, because I threw this mug with a very even rim right here, it can create a good solid attachment here. So I'm going to put a little bit more water down here on this on the wheel head and a little bit on there so that it's just enough. Now I'm going to put it on there. It's going to turn a little bit, but I'm going to let it turn. Now instead of pushing it myself, I do what's called tap centering, and I've become very proficient at this over the years. and get that right, just about nailed right there. Now, the way that I do tap centering, and a lot of people have a problem with this, so I'm going to knock that off again here. Alright, what I do is I look at the opposite side here of where my hand is going to be tapping, and it's very much of a, an eye-to-hand coordination here. So I just somehow kind of know where it is that I have to look on the opposite side to determine how much of a tap that I need to do. Now once I get that centered, this is pretty good, then I kind of give it a couple of taps like that on the top to really seal it. Now what you're depending upon is that the slight moisture there around the rim has actually reconnected this to the top of the wheel here. Now I am careful about this. This is especially a time now when you saw how it kind of popped off there before when I had those 3 pads of clay on there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put my finger on the other side, again, just to not put too much torque on one side of the bottom of the mug here. So I'm cutting away some of the bottom, again, tapping it. Now I can hear, might not be able to hear it on the video here, but I can hear that it's getting a little bit thin there in the middle, and that's exactly what I want. I don't want it to be thick and, thud. I want it to be just very, like a little bit like a drum, more or less. Alright, so I've cut it down to about the right thickness on the bottom. Now I'm going to cut away some of the excess stuff here on the sides. So it's still pretty well centered here. Now another thing that I do sometimes to hold the clay or the pot on there is I have a, let's see if I have it here. Thought I did. I don't know what happened to it. It's probably buried underneath all this other clay here on the top. But anyway, what I do is I sometimes take the lid, a metal lid off of the piece, and I put it right on the top there. I kind of tap center that as well. And I use this as a way to put a lot of extra weight on there when I'm cutting away the other clay down here. Now I have a narrower one than this. This is not the narrowest one that I have, and I was looking for that more narrow one to be able to use in the center here. But anyway, you get the idea more or less of having being able to put some pressure on the top of it there. That's in addition to the adhesion for having wet down the surfaces. So again, I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to cut away just a little bit more here. I don't want to cut into the decorative part. That's right up about here. So that's pretty much the what I want it to look like in terms of cutting away. I want it to cut down some of the excess weight out of the bottom of the pot. Oh, there we go, that's what I was looking for. Now I'm going to use, usually when you start carving away things, some of the grog that is in there, you probably can't see it from where the camera is from, that some of the grog that's in the clay is sort of dragged up to the surface, and it kind of leaves kind of like a rough impression. So what I do is I take a metal rib like this, and instead of attacking it this way so that it would scrape away the clay from it, what I do is I turn it, so what I'm doing is I'm compressing the clay and pushing that grog back down into the clay surface. So now you look at it and it's much smoother the way that I want it to be. The grog that I use is very, very fine mesh, so you don't get the really like sand kind of size. It's much smaller than that, but nonetheless it does help a lot to make the piece much smoother. Now the reason that I've put so much time into trimming down here in the bottom is that if you are like almost anybody else, when they pick up a piece of pottery, they look at it from the top, let's say that this is the thing, and what do they do the next thing? They turn it over and they look at the bottom. So if the bottom of the piece of pottery that you've created is kind of dumpy and not, you know, very well trimmed or anything like that, people are going to go, oh, well, I guess this person didn't know what he was doing. So it's very important to treat the bottom of the pot, even though you mostly won't ever see it, you know, intentionally. I mean, most of the time you don't turn coffee mugs with coffee in it upside down. But finishing off the bottom of it is very important as well. So I have one little tool here that I use sometimes for doing decorative things. There it is. This is something that I got. It is actually a leather, it comes from a leather company, Tandy Leather Company, and what it is, there's a little wheel here, sort of a little spur wheel that's got little points that go all the way around it. And I think this thing was probably about maybe $10 or something like that. I've had this one probably now for about, I'm guessing, 5 years or so. So it's getting worn down a little bit. But what I do with this is, because it leaves a nice little decorative thing here, I'm going to hold it and let it turn here, and I'm going to do it side by side. So I've got 2 layers of this, and it creates this really nice little pattern in the bottom that I use to put my signature on the bottom. I usually sign all of my pots just with my first name, Peter, and then the year. So in this case it's going to say Peter 20, which stands for 2020. So, and then everything else looks pretty good in there. I think what I'm going to do is, because I did this on the top, you might be able to see that I put 2 little lines on the top part right there. So I'm going to do the same thing down here. I'm just going to take a very fine trimming tool here, and I'm just going to cut 2 very small lines in the bottom, sort of as a frame. Okay, you have this sort of, and now I'm going to just tap it off like that. And you can see that there's no damage or anything like that to the top of the rim here. But as you can see, I have this nice sort of decoration, very sort of free-form decoration, but I have these 2 lines, one down here at the bottom, or 2 of them down here at the bottom, and 2 up here at the top, to sort of act as a sense of where the start and the finish is of the free-form design in here. So this is nice and lightweight. I've cut away probably, I don't know, a couple of ounces or so of extra clay that was on here when it was first thrown, maybe not quite that much, but gotten rid of some of the added weight that was down there. So I'm going to do a pulled handle on this a little bit later, but before I do that, I'm going to trim another mug over here and do this one a little bit differently. All right, this piece was thrown, and I sort of illustrated how I could use this device, this sort of chevron device, to create this sort of swirling thing that sort of spirals upwards and dances all around here. And so now it is time. It's fairly thin clay here right now as well, which is great. I mean, this whole thing does not weigh very much at all. But I have this extra weight down here at the bottom, and so I'm going to trim away some of that. So as I did before, I'm going to wet the rim. I'm also going to do the same thing to the top of the wheel here. You don't want it to be really wet, you just want it to be sort of damp. And then I'm going to put it on here, and once again I'm going to kind of hold it, but then I'm going to tap center it. And that's just about what I want, and then I'm going to give it a couple of wraps like that on the bottom to adhere it. I've missed out on a couple of things here. I saw you before trimming the other 2 mugs. This is a 3rd mug, and what I unfortunately did not realize was that I wasn't covering the first part. This is a mug that I am going to do some chattering on the side of it. As you can see, I've already tap centered this into the center. I've cut away some of the excess clay on the bottom here. I created sort of a foot in there, and right now, as you notice, I just sort of wet down the edges of this piece. So I'm going to sort of smooth it out a little bit just by compressing the bottom of it here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a tool that is a handmade tool. This is called my chattering tool. And what this used to be before it got bent like this and sharpened and so on and so forth, this was the kind of a sort of a spatula knife that was used to put icing on cakes and kind of move it around like that. It was probably about yay long, and it had a rounded tip on it, and you'll notice that it's very flexible right here. Alright, so what I did to create this device is I took the original spatula thing, and I have a grinder over there. So instead of having that rounded tip, I ground it off so that it was pretty much straight and flat all the way across the top. Then I cut little sort of corner edges off to kind of create like a slight slope, flat, and then a slight slope on the other side. And the reason is that sometimes if I hold this flat against the side, I will get sort of like long lines coming down. But if I turn it on its corner like this, I get a different pattern that comes out of it rather than the straight lines. So I use it for different reasons. Then I sharpened all three of these sides on the grinder, and I have to resharpen it every now and then because they do get kind of dull because they're literally digging into the clay. And then the last thing that I did was I took a propane torch and I just heated up a section of it about maybe an inch, inch and a half from the top of this. And then once it was red hot, I just took a pair of pliers and I bent it down so that it's just barely over a 90-degree angle right here. So what I do to put texture in here is, again, I kind of dampen the clay just a little bit. It has to be leather hard, but you don't want it to be too wet and you don't want it to be too dry. So sometimes I kind of have to go back and forth. I have to let the clay dry out a little bit. If I find that it is too wet sometimes and it's not really doing this chattering, what happens is when I hold this against the outer edge, as you will see, it kind of digs in and then it gets flipped up and then it immediately snaps back because of the springy nature of this metal right here. That's what's the really important thing to do. And I like this one because I have a good grip on it. Sometimes people use a hacksaw blade to create a chattering device. I prefer using this one, and this one I've been using for almost 20 years now or so. So that feels just about right here. So what I'm going to do is, well, first of all, I should sharpen this up. It's getting a little bit on the dull side, but this will still work. So what I do is I'm going to hold this now at a very acute angle so that it is literally pointing with the intention of digging into the clay. But when I start to hold it and I turn this, I kick it up to full speed, it starts to vibrate. And you can see that there are going to be chunks of clay that are going to come flying off of there. So I'm slowly going all the way down. I'm feeling the vibration in my hands, and you'll notice that I'm sort of curving the thing. You can see how I do this sort of an arc like this. Alright, so I've done that all the way down to the bottom here, or pretty close to the bottom. And now I'm going to stop the wheel, and you will be able to see the texturing. I don't know if it's going to show up very well right now. I'll hold it up to the camera a little bit later. But what this has done is, because I've gone up and down this, in fact I'm going to go back over it and do it again a little bit more. Go up a little bit higher, back down again. I want those little chips to fly off of there. Alright, so having done the chattering now, I am once again going to put a couple of little grooves up here. And let's see here. I think I'll go all the way down to the bottom of the chattering on this. Alright, so that's all done. A little signature in the bottom here before I remove it. That glue in it. By the way, this, because I put these two lines in here that have the the rippling effect in there, you can use this on the side of the pot too as a decorative thing. Sometimes you can just use it and sort of go up and down like that, and it can leave a very nice pattern on the side. So now I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to sign the bottom, Peter 20 once again. I'm going to knock the pot off of there. And you hopefully can see, maybe because the camera's not going to refocus on it, but you can see this texturing that has happened all the way around the side, and it kind of has a swirling kind of effect. I mean, it sort of curves like this. That's because of the way that I held the chattering device. So I kept it sort of vertical at the bottom, and then as I went down, I just kind of curved it down like this. So it's a nice texturing in the bottom here. I've got these lines up here to sort of, put a stop to the chattering in that area. And this is as good a time as any for me to now put one of the extruded handles on here. I sort of saved this piece for that reason. Now, I already cut 3 of these. I only really needed 1 of them. I'm going to show you how I attach this. Because they've been sitting there for a while, they sort of stiffened up a little bit, which is good. You don't want the handles to be too too soft and squishy. Now I see this one's a little bit, actually I'm going to get another one. I have a sprayer bottle that I usually wash down the inside of my extruder because sometimes dry pieces of clay can interfere with it, and that's what happened with that other one. This one is nice and smooth on the inside here and on the outside as well. Now, one of the things I do, I have another very expensive tool here. I was able to eat some of it. It's called cream of mushroom soup. Soup, excuse me. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is, in order to attach this securely here, the diameter here of this is very similar to that of the mug here. So what I'm going to do to make this adhere, normally I would do this before I bend it, but I'm going to use this and kind of create a cutout. Okay, so you can see that there's a curve there. Well, that curve sort of is about the same curve as the side of the mug here. So, next thing I'm going to do is take my other very expensive tool, which is buried in the pile here. This is a special adhesive device. Now, let me guarantee you, I have not used this to brush my teeth per se, but it looks an awful lot like a toothbrush. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet the brush here a little bit, and then I'm going to sort of roughen and soften up the side here where the upper part, see I've created sort of like a little slurry right there at the top. So I'm just using that as the place where the top part of it is going to be adhered. And then I'm going to make another similar thing a little bit farther down here where the bottom part of it is going to be attached. And then, next thing I do is, this clay is a little bit softer than the mug itself, but I'm still going to take the brush and just kind of rub it like that to roughen up the clay so that it will adhere. So now that I've roughened it up, I'm going to put it in here and just sort of push in. And you notice that my finger, my little pinky finger down here, is sort of pushing the bottom part in there a little bit. Now, before I start to really push it in and attach it, I want to line this up. I want to look at it so that the handle is nice and straight and it doesn't sort of skew off to the side or whatever. And then once I've got the right positioning for it, then I start at the bottom and I just kind of push in and I slightly wipe down. And the reason I'm doing that is I want the bottom of it to adhere. I'm just sort of like wiping it into the bottom of the mug here. Okay. And yes, this is going to sort of cover up parts of the chattering underneath it, but that's just to be expected and it's not a problem. So again, I'm going to look at it to make sure that it's properly aligned. Then I'm going to look at the side here, push that a little bit more, and now I'm going to sort of rearrange the curve in there a little bit because I want 2 fingers to be able to get in there nice and easily. And so now that I've got a pretty good curve, I know my fingers, at least 2 fingers, can get in there easily. I'm just going to push it down a little bit more. There we go. And then just carefully smooth out the bottom here. Now what can happen is that the glaze will sometimes flow down here and it will fill in some of the spaces that are down near the bottom. So I'm not quite so worried. But I just want to make sure that when it's drying that it isn't going to pop off. And again, the clay up here at the top has adhered very nicely to the top of it here. So these are really good because they're relatively slow and easy, fast and easy to do. And I could create like about 25 handles like that very quickly, whereas doing a pulled handle is much more time consuming. So there we go. I think that goes pretty well with the shape of this mug and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to put this aside for now. And I had mentioned how I was going to do a pulled handle. This is a style, you might notice that these are sort of similar. This is a pulled handle right here. So I'm going to do a pulled handle this time around. And grab some more clay. Now, usually when I do pulled handles, I have a whole lot of mugs that I've made that I need to create pulled handles for. So what I do is I frequently start with a lot more clay than what I have in my hands here right now. But because I'm only going to be doing one pulled handle, I don't need a whole lot of clay. But I've got to have enough to be able to hold on to it and also to be able to kind of pull and stretch the clay out here. I've got probably about 25 mugs in the refrigerator, the upper part. And by the way, it's not a functioning refrigerator. It hasn't run for many, many years. It's just a place to store pots to keep them at the right dampness. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing is I'm going to decide where I want to put the handle. And it's going to be up here sort of near the top. And this looks like a good place. So I'm just going to take the brush here, wet it down a little bit. And I'm going to create sort of a good attachment place here. This both roughens it, but it also softens up the clay there so that the clay that I'm attaching to it is going to adhere to it on both sides. Okay, so I've done that. I'm going to let that dry out just a little bit. Hopefully not too much. Get my hands cleaned up. And now I'm going to start pulling the handle here, as it's called. Now normally, like I said, I'd have a big piece of it and I would pull a really long rope of it and then lay it down and then chop it up into pieces about 2.5 inches long. But I don't need to do that with this one. So what I'm going to do is I wet my hands and I'm going to begin to slowly pull around. You notice that I'm twisting things as I'm going around here, and I'm beginning to elongate the clay as my hands slide over it. All right, so this is just about the right length right now, and you notice it's a little thicker right there. So I'm going to take a pin tool and cut it off. Cut it near the top there. Now this is a little bit on the wet side for me to be handling it, but I think for the sake of brevity here I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to hold this up. And then I'm going to kind of tap it and flare out the top of it here on all different directions. Okay, so you can see that it's wider here, it's a little bit narrower that way, but it's been widened out and flattened out. All right, and then the bottom is still there. So then, because I've already wet this down right in here, and I've done the same down here at the bottom, next thing I'm going to do is put the flared out part of the handle on the side of the mug there, but I leave a little bit of space here at the top here because you don't want the top of the handle itself to be right by the rim. So then I kind of push this into the clay. This is very good plastic clay, so it adheres very nice and easily. So now what I'm doing is I'm kind of pushing the clay in and around it because I want it to look as though this handle just sort of grew out of the sides of the mug, as though it was all part of one creature, not two separate parts here. So I kind of do that all the way around so that it's nicely adhered. There's no cracks or anything like that around there. All right. So then I'm going to turn the handle or the cup like this, and wet my hands again, and I'm going to start pulling this. But you'll notice that every now and then I put it between my fingers, do it again, and then I do it the other way like this. And what is happening here by putting it between my hands that way is that it's wide this way, but it's narrow like that. And that makes it much more comfortable to handle. And I'm doing it from opposing sides because I don't want to have one side be thicker than the other side. So I'm going to keep on pulling down. Every now and then I'll just kind of run my fingers down the outside to kind of keep the edges rounded. But I'm just pulling like this until I feel that I've got just about the right thickness. You don't want it to be too thin because you'll be afraid that it will be weak, and you don't want it to be too thick because you want it to be comfortable to hold on to. So I'm going to look at it now from the bottom and make sure that it's hanging straight down, not kind of skewing off like that. It looks good. It's got a nice curve at the bottom here, and it's got another nice curve there that makes it look like it sort of grew out of there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put my hand on the inside like this to hold it. And then I'm going to grab the bottom of this and I pull it up, and then I attach it down here so that I have a nice curve in there. Now sometimes I need to push it up to make it longer. Sometimes I need to push it down. That looks like that's pretty good size to be able to get at least 2, if not 3 fingers in there. So what I was saying is I want to make sure that when I look at the mug and where the handle is coming down, I notice that I need to straighten it out a little bit. I don't want it to be sort of going off, you know, diagonally off the bottom. So then, seeing that that's a good size, what I do is I put my finger here and I push it into the bottom, and then I kind of carefully wipe away the excess clay down there. Now what I do after that is I just kind of clean it up a little bit, get rid of some of that extra clay that doesn't really contribute to it, and just sort of work it into the clay down here, wipe it smoothly on both sides. And again, just like on this mug right here, the glaze covers up a lot of, you know, what could be considered a problem otherwise. So then I look at the shape of it here, the shape of the handle that's there. I like to have a little bit of a rise up here, so I'm going to push this up just a little bit. In other words, I'm pushing and pulling it that way. And then I want this to be a little bit more straight over here. So that has a nice shape to it. Now later on, when this handle has dried out enough a little bit, I'm going to put a little thumb tab on top of this here, just as I have on my mug here, because that way you have something to sort of grip onto, especially when you're tilting your coffee cup up like that. But that is something that gets added a little bit later, or added a little bit later. Now what I'm going to do is kind of just recheck the connection up here, because I don't want it. Sometimes what will happen is if the mug itself is too dry when you first put the handle on there, that mug has already shrunk somewhat. But this clay is going to shrink much more than the drier part of the mug here. So that can cause cracks that will happen around the edges. So what I do is after I have pulled this, sometimes what I do is I turn it upside down on the board here. And the reason is not only does it hold the shape of the handle in that nice kind of curved position, but because it's sealing the inside from evaporating on the inside, you know, now the bottom is going to dry out at about the same speed as it does up here. If you left it like this all the time, then there's a chance that the top part is going to dry out much faster than the bottom part. So what I'm going to do is just turn this upside down here. I'm going to go on to doing another handle. This one could probably do well with a pulled handle. So let me get a little bit more clay here, what I had left, and add a little bit more to it. So what I'm doing now, because I just added a little bit more clay to it, I'm sort of doing a roll between the hands, wedging of the clay, because you want the clay to be sort of uniformly moist all the way through. So some of the clay was some of the extruded things, and that had dried out a little bit, but I don't need to do any more extruded handles at this time. So again, I'm going to begin to pull the handle here, and right now you'll notice that I'm just sort of turning the thing because I want it to be relatively round when I'm pulling it out. Okay. This handle is going to be a little bit longer than the other one, so I'm just going to pull it out a little bit more. Okay, cut that off. Usually what I do is when I pull a whole bunch of handles or one long thing of it, I cut them up, and then the next thing I do is I sort of flare them out like that, and I just sort of stand them up like little soldiers or something like that, you know, maybe 6 of them at a time, because I'm going to be doing 6 pulled handles, one right after another here. But since I'm only doing one more, I only need to make one handle here. So again, I'm going to just pick a spot here, see if I can find an uninteresting place to put the handle on. And I'm going to use the brush here. Need to moisten it up. Same thing down at the bottom. And remember, this mug is taller than the other one was, so that's why I had to use a little bit more clay. Alright. This has already been flared out pretty well. Alright. So again, because this is good and wet, all I have to do now is just sort of push this on here, and because it's very adhesive clay, it sticks on there pretty well, but I need to, you know, push the edges in all around. So I'm just going to sort of work those in there. Now, one thing that is important is that the mug here is just about right in terms of being leather hard. Now, because I'm putting a lot of torque on it by pulling this handle down, I don't want the rim to be soft enough so that it actually would start to, you know, pull it into an oval shape here. So that's why I like to have the rim be leather hard but not soft. Alright, so this is just about the perfect time and way to do this. So like I did before, as I said, I am trying to make it wide this way, narrow that way. That's still pretty thick. Okay, I'm doing it on opposing sides to make sure that both sides are sort of the equal thickness. I feel a little bit of roughness on one side. It might be that there's something in the clay or possibly an air bubble over there. Okay, now sometimes I will run my thumb back and forth over it, and I'll do that on the bottom as well, just to get it balanced. All right, it's gotten to be much longer than I really needed it to be, but I'm glad that that is done. Now, one of the things that I did not mention before, that's also important, is that because this clay is much wetter than the clay of the mug part of it itself, is that after I pull the handle around on here, this is going to be a good 3-finger mug. So again, I'm going to make sure that it's straightened here. It's looking pretty good. Okay, push that in down on the bottom. Wipe it away. Wipe away the excess stuff. Smooth it that way. Make sure that the sides are looking good too. And again, the nice thing about having that glaze sort of run down a little bit is that it will cover over any small areas, so I don't worry about that too much. So again, now I'm going to kind of change the... You don't want to have the handle stick out so far that you're holding the mug here and drinking out of it like this. That would be ridiculous. You want it to be close by, like that. All right, so having done that, one of the last things that I do before I finish it, and I have to wait to, for this to stiffen up a little bit before I can put that thumb tab on top of there. But one of the last things I do is I just wet my fingers here and I kind of wet the inside of it. And the reason I'm doing that is because by adding the water on the inside, the clay is going to absorb some of the water and make this part of it over here closer to the plasticity of the clay, so that this is a little bit damper here than it is over here on this side. I don't worry about over here because the handle isn't over there. It's over here where the handle is attached and where the clay is still very soft compared to the rest of the clay body. I don't worry about it down at the bottom. That sort of seems to take care of itself. But again, putting that little bit of extra water in there really helps keep the handle from sort of drying and cracking or even popping off altogether. So, curve looks good. And also remember too that when the clay is drying out, it tends to sort of pull itself into its own shape that it wants to be. I mean, it's not like the clay has a mind, but it does have a tendency sometimes to, make the shape of the handle to be just what you want it to be. Okay, so that's enough for now of those mugs. Having put handles on 3 of them, 2 of them pulled handles and 1 of them extruded handles. They all work pretty well. So now I'm going to trim a couple of other things here too. Now, this is a pot that I did on the first day, and I threw this without realizing that the video capture only lasted a maximum of 20 minutes. So here I thought that I had showed very clearly how I made this, but unfortunately the 20 minutes had been used up before I realized that people didn't see this. I can't very well throw this again right now, but you'll get an idea. This was done by throwing a straight up walled cylinder. I took one of these devices right here, and I think I used the smaller size. There's the really coarse saw, medium, and then the very fine side. And what I did was I did a set of lines that went straight up all the way around, and then I kind of created a start and a finish up here at the top. And then, without ever touching the outside again, I started to run my hands down there and expand that cylinder into this shape. and because of the torque of the clay as you are, you're creating drag in there, and that's what causes the spiral effect that's here in this place. Now there's a lot of places here where I've got little bits of clay here that are not really part of the lines, but what I can do is when this dries out completely, I take sort of a light and kind of coarse weight brush, more or less, and I can just pretty much wipe those things away and get rid of those extra things on there that sort of distract from the appearance of it. So again, I'm tap centering here. That's pretty darn good right there. Now is the time when I'm going to use the wider handle. Okay. I'll try and do this before this video thing ends too quickly. Now again, this is a case where I've done a lot of the decoration while I was throwing the pots before. I showed you a little bit about texturing there, chattering, and I'm going to do some more chattering shortly thereafter, but I want to finish this one up fairly quickly. Okay, got rid of some of the excess clay. Flatten the bottom. Notice my finger on the opposite side, applying some downward pressure so that it doesn't sort of fly off because of the drag of the trimming tool here. Again, that's alright. I think I can still cut away a little bit more here on the sides. Now you realize that I'm only trimming away the parts that I had intentionally already sort of ribbed away. I don't want to remove too much of those lines that are there. So, okay, that looks pretty good. Again, use the rib, compress the clay, do it on the side. Here's a case where I can actually use this rib to actually cut away a little bit more of the clay. First, giving me a nice curve. Then the last thing is to compress it, push that grog back into it so that it's a nice smooth feel to it. Right. Sometimes it's kind of fun to do a little something extra here. Instead of just doing the things, I sometimes chatter at the bottom. So that gives a nice little texture in the bottom, and then I can just sign right over that, which kind of cuts through the texturing there. And then I can do the very edges. I use this little tool to sort of form a frame around that texturing in the middle, and there we go. So there it is signed, and it's got that texturing. You can't see it very well with the lighting and everything here that it has, but this is pretty much it. Yeah, actually, I'm going to do one more quick thing here. There's quite a gap here. This one. Again, put this on top. And let's see, where did my trimming tool go? So much junk on my wheel head. Alright, so I'm going to create a groove down here, and then a very small one just above it, like that. There's too abrupt a change in there. So that makes it look a little bit better because I've already got the double lines up here and I've repeated them down here. So there we go. Okay, so the center is now fine. It's nice and smooth. I like that. Using the rib to sort of compress it smooths it out and gives it a very good texture. But I do notice that there is a little bit of unevenness over here. So I'm going to trim some of this outer area down here. And I'm also going to trim away this excess stuff here around the edge. So once again, just for safety's sake, I'm going to put that on there. And I'm just going to kind of very lightly touch it while I am trimming away excess weight out here on the rim. This is where I like to use this curved surface. Now, again, because of the way that it was cut, I lost a little bit of the evenness, so I'm going to there we go. So what I've done, what I just did was I kind of, this is flat all the way out, so what I did was I kind of cut into it on an angle like this and then smoothed it out so that it's relatively flat, and that has gotten rid of that sort of little extra cut in there, but it hasn't taken away anything that's going to make the plate not be just about perfect all the way down. So the last thing to do, once again, is to go back this, compress it down, nice and smooth. Right, run the finger over it just to get it nice round that cut there. But I'm going to actually trim away a little bit more of that so that it is rounded. This also helps when you are stacking plates together. You don't want the rough clay to actually scratch the glaze that is on the next plate up, so to speak. So that's why I want to round that nicely right there. Okay, then I'm going to use I have another similar device here that I use occasionally. And let's see, I don't know if I have that here. It's very similar to this, but it has a different texture to it. And I guess I don't have that handy here. Well, never mind. It's just a different thing that also came from the leather thing. Same company that makes these makes some really nice leather impression designs that you can use. So anyway, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to make 2 impressions in there. Okay, it has a nice texturing in there. And then I'm going to sign. Alright, so that is this, that's the bottom side. Got that taken care of. Now what I'm going to do is remove this. Alright, now the next issue of this, let me put this back down on a flat surface. Right, I'm going to do some texturing, and that's going to require removing the splash pan here. Alright, these are pieces of gypsum board here. These are left over from when my studio was built 36 years ago. The nice thing about gypsum boards here is that they are very, very flat, which is just great. That's what you want to have happen. And some of these were cut down to smaller sizes. Now the reason that I don't want to put this plate directly back on the wheel is that the wheel is going to kind of stick to the bottom of the clay here. And I don't want that to happen. So what I can do is I can put that right here on top of this gypsum board and use this as a surface that, first of all, I can push that down so that it's nice and flat. But you're going to see some of the texturing that I'm going to put in here now that is a little bit different from anything that you've seen before here. And this is sort of the fun part here. It's going to take some time, so I might have to just sort of stop the video for a short period of time. And all that. So, going to dampen this down a little bit. It's a little bit drier out here on the edge. I'm just going to go in and out a little bit. Alright. Now, one of the ways that I really enjoy texturing pieces like this is there's a company, there's a couple of different companies, and they create wooden stamps of different designs here. Now, I tend to like sort of just geometric patterns. They have everything that you can imagine. They have little fluffy ponies, and they have butterflies, and they have hearts, and so on and so forth. That's just not my shtick, so to speak. I like using some of these geometric patterns here. For example, here is one that is sort of like a diamond kind of a shape here. I can clear this out a little bit here with my pin tool. It's been several months since I last used these, so I need to clean them up a little bit. So, just kind of clean out any excess clay that's in there right now with the pin tool here, which is fine. I have some that are also sort of triangular shapes like this, and sometimes I use two different triangular shapes, sort of inverting them, and you can see that they are slightly different shapes and everything like that, but I can do these impressions around the outside edge here. So what I'm going to do is, this is a single plate that I'm going to use to do some decorative stamping around here. Now, it takes a long time, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing a few things, then I'm going to stop the movie part of it, and then I'm going to turn it back on again after I'm done. So what I'm going to do here is, I need to keep in mind that I'm going to put a couple of grooves here on the outside of where the stamping is going to be. So therefore what I do is, since I've already tap centered this, I'm going to make a very light line out here. And this is going to be the outer edge of where the stamping is going to take place. So in other words, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this sort of diamond shape one here, and I'm going to be pressing into the clay right at the edge of that little groove that I put around there. Now, one of the problems with clay that is still soft enough to be impressed into is that sometimes that clay can stick to the inside of the stamp that you're using. But there's a really good thing that you can use to take care of that. Now, just in case you've ever wondered where all of those single socks have disappeared to, you think that maybe they got sucked into the vortex or something like that. No, what they are is they are a very good way to fill them up with cornstarch. Right? You're wondering, cornstarch? Was that like leftover from popping corn or something like that? What cornstarch does is it acts as a separator, more or less, and it cuts way down on the potential for clay getting stuck in the in the stamp. So what I do is I put it into the stamp, or excuse me, into the sock, and I can just sort of tamp all the way around and put a layer of cornstarch on there. Now the cornstarch, when it goes through the kiln firing, just burns itself off, so it doesn't really affect anything. But what it does do is keep the stamp from getting filled up with clay. So I'm going to start and make the first impression in here, right on the edge. I push it in and I kind of rock it around a little bit so that I have a good clean impression in there. Now you probably can't see it very well, but I'm going to do several of these things to begin with. Side by side, I'm keeping them really tight here, and I'm just using that outer line there as the way to keep them all at the right location. Okay, when you get close to the end, you run into the problem that sometimes you can't, it's a little bit wider or a little bit narrower than you might necessarily have the space for to stamp it. So one time, in this case, I'm pretty close to being just about perfect here. But what I'm going to do is, since I can only really fit 2 more stampings in here, I'm going to spread them out just a little bit farther. But what I'm going to do is, instead of just pressing down, I'm going to rock side by side to make it a little bit wider as well. And then do the final stamping right there. So, if you didn't know what I had done, you would hardly be able to tell very easily where the 2 had overlaid. So now I've stamped this all the way around here. And the next step is I'm going to take a very thin, this one is better, the other one is worn out, so I'm going to use this better one right here. So I've already created this pattern all the way around, and now I'm going to put a couple of grooves, not deep grooves, but just grooves, side by side. Same thing on the inside. Alright, so now I could leave it as this, just as it is. It looks very nice. You've got this nice pattern that goes all the way around. This can be absolutely beautiful. But there's another technique here that I have used just briefly before. Oh, here we go. And that is the chattering tool here. I just sharpened this. I took it over and took a file to it and sort of sharpened it up a little bit so that it's going to make a nice texture. Now, there's a number of different ways that I can create this texturing in here. I can keep it, I can start out here and just come straight across in like this. And the pattern is going to sort of look like the spokes of a bicycle wheel, just kind of all coming out from the center, coming out nice and straight. Or, another way I can do it is that instead of using this flat surface, I mentioned that I can turn it on its side, and I can go like this and work my way in. And what that will do will sort of, because this is going to be sort of more of a stippled pattern than a flat pattern like this, it can actually create somewhat of a curvature of it in here, which is what I want to do, just to sort of illustrate this time. And then I've got one more thing that I'm going to do that is just going to be sort of like the final touch to it. So in order to make this nice and textured and all, I'm going to get this going pretty fast right now. And I'm going to start at the very outer edge. And I'm going to bring myself in. Keep that wheel going. Sometimes I speed it up as I get towards the center, right there. Right. So I've gone all the way into the center. A lot of the little chips have sort of flown off of there. Oh, this is one of those times that's just about perfect. I love it. So you probably can't see this very well, but I will hold it up a little bit later on here. That stippling is swirling inward, sort of like the solar system, more or less, as you know, the whole solar systems just spin around. This is all coming in as though the center is a dark hole that it's being drawn into. It came out really, really, really well. So, I almost want to leave this as it is, but just one last thing that I'm going to do that sometimes really sets this apart is I'm going to take tool here that I have. I'm going to clean this up because I want this to be a nice clean appearance here. I'm going to use my little chevron shape here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this going again. I don't want it to be going as fast as I did before. I'm going to use this, and I'm going to start this in the center, and I'm going to do a very quick sort of swirling out here, out to the outer edge of this thing. So, and I don't want to do a long thing that keeps getting wider and wider. I want to do one kind of smooth thing that comes out very quickly. And what, I guess it's pouring rain outside. So what it's going to do is going to, well, I'll just go ahead and do this here. All right, start at the middle. Just go from the center right out in one smooth movement like that. And you can see how this has created sort of a nautilus kind of shape here, that spiral that goes out. If you did it too long, it just wouldn't look as good. This is something that just really accentuates the fact that you've got this stippling in here. So I'm going to hold this up right now, and I hope that you can see what this design has come out to be here. You might not be able to see the texturing in there, but it's just really, really nice. I'm not saying this just to sort of blow my own horn here or whatever, but this one just came out really, really nicely. So, now I've got a couple of things here. I noticed that I think one of my fingernails sort of created a little bit of a groove here on the rim, so I'm going to get rid of that now. This is the nice thing about clay, is that you can patch things up pretty easily, is that I have this little groove that my fingernail did on here. So I'm just going to wet that down a little bit, get some water on there, and then I'm just going to sort of go back and forth over it and kind of compress it a little bit, let the clay sort of fill in that space right in there that I accidentally did with my fingernail. And frankly, it's just about completely gone. You'd never even know that it happened there, you know, unless you really looked at it. And of course, when the glaze goes over it, that's going to seal it up. So I'm very, very happy with this. Now, again, here's the reason why I did this on this board, is I wanted to be able to pick this up. Now you'll notice that there's a little bit of dampness around here, but it didn't adhere to it at all. The bottom is still nice and smooth as it should be. If I had put this on the wheel, it probably would have stuck right around the wetter edges here, and it would have created little divots on the underside of it. So I wanted this to be as close to perfect as I could, and it certainly came out to be that way. Alright, so all the different texturing that went into it. First of all was the stamping, and using the, lost sock here, filling it up with cornstarch, and because this is a cotton sock, I was able to just damp it all the way around, and that got perfectly clean impressions here of this particular style here. That's one of the stamps that I use. There's many more of them that I can illustrate with as well. Then I put the grooves out here to sort of create a frame around the stamping here. Then the next thing I did was I did the chattering on here, and did it on the edge so that I had more sort of very fine stippled points in here. And then the last thing that I did was use my chevron device here and did this one sort of swirling thing. I just did a very quick movement from the center. You've got to be very direct and plan to do it. You can't just kind of go, oh, what am I going to do, and then it'll look uneven. You just simply start at the center and you go out very quickly and you stop right at the very edge, and it just blends in and does this really beautiful nautiloid sort of shape on it. So that's how I have decorated this one. Now I did this extra plate here just to illustrate this particular design on here. I have 5 other plates that are going to be part of a set, and the person that it's going to does not want that nautilus thing there in the middle. He wants more of the sort of straight up spokes coming from the center here. So I am going to do those at a different time, different location. So this is a good time for me to stop right now.